I was just impromptu assigned to now moderate this event. I'm very excited. I've been preparing for all of 27 seconds for this this great thing that we've got going here. Michael's not here, but what I lack in being Michael Hewlett, I make up for in being in this room. I'm going to do the best I can, given that I just found out I was doing this about a minute and a half ago. So, I have not prepared any sort of spiel to introduce the debaters today, but I assume that each pair knows a little bit about each other, so I will allow them to introduce each partner in crime. So we've got Dr. Rada and Dr. Frost, and you can each introduce the other. Say something about.
This is Dr. Rada.
And who is he?
Well, he's one of the instructors in first year.
Yeah.
What is he? Argument?
Good. And?
And this is Dr. Frost.
Yes.
And she teaches the course that used to be West Civ. And now it is. Practices of health.
Okay.
We're a tight team.
Right here.
This is John Farrow, and I can unwaveringly say he's in fourth year art. This is Matt Blackshaw, also unwaveringly in fourth year art.
Okay, great. So I will get out my phone, which luckily has a timer on it. We will be time what. And so the debate, the topic that we are going to be debating today is: be it resolved that honesty is the best policy. As far as I know, humans have been honest for hundreds of years. I don't know, dozens maybe. I don't know how long this has been a thing that people do. But so let's, at some point someone decided that it may or may not be a good policy. And so that's what we're going to be fighting over this today. John and Matt will be supporting this resolution, while Dr. Rod and Dr. Frost will be arguing against it. And so, here we go. We're going to start with 8 minutes, opening arguments from each team. Do we know who goes first, or do I just decide? Do they go first? Okay, go ahead. You have 8 minutes. I don't know. I assume that that's something the moderator decides. But you have 8 minutes, starting when you start talking.
Alright.
There it goes.
It's beautiful. So welcome, arts and science students, faculty, our opponents, to the death of dishonesty, the laying low of lies, and the undoing of unscrupulousness. Be it resolved that resolutely that honesty is the best policy. Now the first step for any honest-to-goodness debate is to define the terms. For this debate, we believe honesty is the attempt to convey truth, and best policy indicates a course of action that is most often correct for most people. This correctness comes in epistemological, social, political, economic, and other forms as well. It is important to distinguish right from the beginning honesty is the best policy from straight-up meanness. As an honesty policy does not mean an annihilation of filters or going out of your way to make people feel bad with your honest opinions. For instance, you may have noticed that we did not refer to our esteemed and respected opponents opposite, because that would have been dishonest. We also didn't call them liars on the other side of the room, even though that's what they are in this case. They are proud liars. We used honesty, the best policy, to tread the line between inaccurate flattery and boorish bluntness. When one uses dishonesty as their policy, one runs the risk of inaccurate bluntness and boorish flattery. It is also important to remember that even the best policy is not a perfect policy. Honesty, much like Churchill's democracy, may in fact be the worst policy, except for all of the other ones. We are contending that honesty is the best available policy. So let us count the ways in which honesty is the best policy. I think there's about 4 that we're going to talk about. The first is epistemological. So Dr. Frost, as a practices of knowledge, or POC as they call it apparently, professor, you should know a little something about epistemology, the study of knowledge. Communicating any truth or knowledge about the world requires honesty. It's an attempt to tell the truth. With only dishonesty, there can be no solid foundation on which to build a conversation, a friendship, or a totally healthy and platonic brain crush on one's professor, whose name may or may not rhyme with Bob. For instance, if I were to say, wow, those are really nice shoes, Dr. Frost, the only world in which information is conveyed is one in which honesty rules as the best policy. If you suspected that I was being dishonest, you might start to wonder if I really thought those were nice shoes. Perhaps I think those shoes are wonderful. Maybe I think they're hideous, or even just mediocre at best. Perhaps I don't even think they're shoes. I could have thought that they were sandals, clogs, mucklucks. For all you know, I could think that you had 2 live rhinoceroses on your feet. And that's a really preposterous idea, made possible only by straying from the honesty policy. So communication, the underpinning of all societies, requires honesty. It requires an attempt to get at the truth, to uncover knowledge, and to transmit information. By even participating in this debate and trying to communicate, you're proving that honesty is the best policy. Now moving on, Dr. Frost, as a political scientist, you should know a little something about politics. I didn't. But then I looked it up on Wikipedia. Remark the honesty there. I learned that the word comes from the Greek politikos, meaning of, for, or relating to the citizens. According to the World Forum on Democracy, just over 58% of the world's citizens live in democracy. Admittedly, there is a lot of work to be done, but democracy is widely regarded as the best policy. It allows people to participate in their government and facilitates freedom and civic trust. You know what allows democracy to exist? Honesty. And bureaucracy, but mostly it's honesty. Votes are submitted and interpreted as the voice of the people. Imagine a world where the X that you put in the circle had nothing to do with who won. Imagine Florida in the year 2000. I sure wouldn't have wanted to live there. But I guess maybe it was for the best, because otherwise we may never have seen Al Gore get on that scissor lift and tell us about an inconvenient truth. In order for democracy to work, we need to trust the electoral officers are being honest. So I ask our opponents, do you hate democracy? Do you turn your backs on the brave men and women who fought for our right to live in a free society where we can hold silly debates? Do you honestly still believe that honesty, the foundation of democracy, is not the best policy? I'll turn it over to Matt.
Now, you've given me a lot of attention, Dr. Foster. So, Dr. Roddick, as a living organism, surely you know something about absorbing nutrients. It's necessary for survival, but a delicious food can be a downright divine experience. Let's examine the case of what I had previously written down as Michael, but will now say Matthew Jordan, an intrepid seeker of locally grown produce. One day, he comes across a farm stand at the end of a dusty driveway. Available are succulent eggplants. An honesty jar meets Matthew's eyes as he wanders across the table. Should he wish to take one of the aubergines he so desires, he is expected to leave payment inside of his specialized mason jar. Uncertain of what to do in such an ethical quandary, he turns to his shoulder angels and devils. So to his left, if he were facing this way, we persuade him to pay the price of the preciously picked purple produce. But, on the other side, he's assured that he need not do such a thing. No one's watching. He could get a free lunch out of this. Obviously, this is the incorrect answer, for it did not use alliteration. But also, if he were to be dishonest and temporarily profit from his dishonesty, he could return next week and find this farm stand was no more. In fact, the farmer had to go out of business. He could no longer support the 8 mouths he had to feed and pay his daughter through medical school. Is that what you want? Is that what you want? More so, even in a more selfish universe, Matthew is no longer able to purchase things, which kind of sucks. Furthermore, Dr. Roddick, as both a logician and a temporary resident of an Iranian jail, you may be familiar with the prisoner's dilemma. Imagine the following. You and an accomplice, who we'll affectionately call Cifro, have been accused of a grievous crime, losing a debate to 2 dashing undergrads. Your accusers ask whether or not this is the case. Of course it is. You lost. Should you both lie, you'll be faced with a punishment, but if you both tell the truth, it will be a lesser penalty. Now, if one of you lies and the other tells the truth, of course, the liar will get off scot-free, and the truth teller will be severely punished. Now, as Anthony somewhere can tell you, there is a Nash equilibrium in game theory where you both lie. Thank you, Matthew. So if you both lie, this is a Nash equilibrium. Obviously, this is not a desirable situation for both of you. But if you both accept that honesty is the best policy, this allows you to both get away with a much lesser punishment. Of course, it may be punishment enough knowing you lost to such handsome undergrads. But that's for yourself to sort out later. So clearly, we can see honesty is the best policy, I think.
Okay, thank you. Now for your 8-minute introduction.
Yeah, we're going to do the same thing of splitting the time, so, okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much. It's pleasant to be invited here to this great tradition and to address the assembled ArtSci community. But I have to admit I was, in fact, a little concerned when I got the email about this, because I thought, they can't actually be serious, that honesty is the best policy? Is this what they're teaching you? I don't know. I don't do this in my class, do you? No. So something has gone seriously wrong if the ArtScis are under the impression that honesty is in fact the best policy, so it's about time that your professors set you straight. So that's what we're going to try and do here, because you know, we've had some very interesting stories, and I say stories over here from people who are extremely creative, drawing wonderful word pictures for you to persuade you as to the importance of their position, but of course, you know, they invented it all for the purposes of the debate. So here, I want to tell you something very important, though. Get quite serious here. What's at stake if you accept this, quite honestly, a quite muddled and wrong-headed position, is what is at stake is the very fabric of society. Now they talked about democracy, isn't that wonderful? I'm gonna one-up them and talk about something even more important and tell you that not only will it be an unpleasant, what you say, undemocratic world, which I have no trouble with, by the way, not only will it be an undemocratic world, but it will be a very ugly world. It is a world that you do not want to live in. You do not want to live in a world where honesty is the best policy. Now, let me explain to you how that is. One of the things that we're going to talk about here is the fact that clearly something other than honesty is probably a good policy too, right? So if honesty is the best policy, then that means nothing else is better than it. So let's take something like, say, human rights. Not better than honesty. I could kind of rest my case there, I think. But, you know, there's lots of things that are better than honesty, right? I mean, so how about, for instance, saving a drowning child from a lake? Better than honesty? Yes. You know, you can correct a fib. You can even correct meanness, but you can't bring a drowning child back. Oh, you laugh, you cruel people. So it seems to me that we have no choice. Something has to be better than honesty, and I want to prove to you that you already think this way, that you already reject this position. It's adorable. I mean, they're so I mean, it warms my heart that they think that way. But you don't. You already agree with me, and I'm going to give you a story because it's a great way of showing what really matters. I'm going to tell you a story of how you already think this. So let's imagine that you live in a society, quite an evil society. It's got a terrible government, and this government tends to persecute its minorities. And let's imagine that a family of that particular minority comes to your house and seeks shelter. Oh, that's wonderful. You say, out the back, have a picnic. It'll be wonderful. So they're out the back having a picnic, and then a representative of the evil government comes to your door. And they knock on the door, and of course the question they ask is, would any of our persecuted minorities be here? We're looking for someone to persecute. Now let me point out that anyone who looked at that opportunity and said, gosh, should I maybe tell them they're out the back having a picnic? That is a very cold and dark world. No one should have even a question at that moment that honesty is not the best policy. policy. And so that is why I think you already agree with us on this particular point.
How much time?
3.5 minutes.
Okay. Dr. Frost's arguments, I think, have clearly shown that honesty is not the best policy. But I'd like to take a little bit of a different approach and take this a little bit further and suggest that in some cases, dishonesty is actually the best policy. So I'm going to push it a little bit further than what Dr. Frost was suggesting. Now, by arguing this way, I'm not trying to show that dishonesty is always the best policy for everyone. I mean, in fact, if that was my position, my entire line of reasoning would be self-defeating. For I would either believe that dishonesty is always the best policy, or I would not. If I do not believe that dishonesty is the best policy, then why should my arguments convince you? They don't even convince me. So if I don't believe that dishonesty is the best policy, then I shouldn't be convincing you. And if I do believe that dishonesty is the best policy, then why are you trusting me? To deceive you, to fool you into thinking that dishonesty is the best policy, when really it is not. So if I'm trying to prove to you that dishonesty is always the best policy, it's a failure. However, I want to suggest that there are some situations where a policy of dishonesty, as opposed to just acting dishonestly occasionally, can actually be the right policy to adopt. The movie Europa Europa tells the true story of Solomon Perel, a German Jewish boy who hid from the Nazis by pretending to be one. First in the army, where he was taken in by a unit of soldiers as an auxiliary, then after being adopted by the company commander at an elite Nazi academy. Throughout this time, Perel pretended to be someone he was not. Perel was dishonest, not merely on occasion, but systematically. He was dishonest with his fellow soldiers. He was dishonest with the company commander who adopted him. He was dishonest with his teachers at the academy. He was dishonest with his best friend, and he was even dishonest to his girlfriend. He adopted a policy of dishonesty, but I have trouble condemning him for it. If Perel had been honest, he would be dead within a day. When a just or an innocent person finds themselves alone in an unjust regime, a policy of dishonesty, I think, is often the best one. Fortunately, we rarely find ourselves in these types of situations. But the fact that these situations arise calls our opponent's position into question. For our opponents are not trying to show that honesty is the best policy, except when it isn't. They're really, despite their attempt to waffle a little bit here, they're trying to show that honesty truly is the best policy. This position precludes active deception. If there are situations where dishonesty is in fact the best policy, then our opponent's position is false. And I think that those situations exist. Thank you.
Okay, so the next part of the debate is going to be 2 rounds of 5-minute rebuttals. So each team's going to get 5 minutes for 2 rounds, starting with you guys. Go right ahead.
All right. So Dr. Frost, you did criticize us for creatively inventing these stories, but we didn't just steal them from the Tarantino movies. Furthermore, to address your point, you gave quite nice examples. I also like saving drowning children when given the opportunity, but what if that child was in fact a mermaid? And you just threw it onto the land, looking at the sunk page in our books to enrich about it. So I don't believe that is always the best policy. Furthermore, we don't say that you can't get ahead by being dishonest or using some other policy to dictate your actions as an individual. No. If something is the best policy, surely it should be adopted by everyone, not just someone trying to take advantage or in fact survive in a very dangerous situation. An example that springs to mind is a water park with a very tall water slide. People are honest. I know that you got there before me. I'll stand in line right behind you before going down. But if you have someone like, well, let's say one of you two, storming up the tower, just pushing elbows into children's faces, dishonest about the order in which you arrived. Certainly, you could have a fun day at the water park. It's sunny, you can go down as many times as you want, no one's for you. But if everyone tried adopting this policy, well then it would be a ball of human flesh hurtling down at the speed. It would be like a Tokyo subway car going down a water slide. It would be like an apocalypse, or if you will, a frost rot eclipse. I wouldn't wish that upon anyone, and given your concern concern for drowning children, I think you may have a few of those down in the car. So I would be careful about which examples you use in the future. John, do you have anything to add?
Right off the top, Dr. Frost said it was pleasant to be invited here, but remember everyone, she's arguing for dishonesty. Was she telling the truth? Did she really think that it was pleasant to be invited? Who knows what's in Dr. Frost's mind when honesty is not the best policy? Also, I'd like to draw another example of someone who disguised their identity, used a little bit of dishonesty in order to survive in a dangerous situation. She lived in China, and her name was Mulan. She was dishonest in a very similar way. She just deceived everyone that she met, tricking them into thinking that she was a male. And that worked out fine, but you know it worked out better when she was honest. She uncovered and she used her skills and taught everyone else her skills, and she had a happy ending because she was honest. So while dishonesty can be useful in certain situations, sometimes, as an overarching best policy, honesty will always win.
Well, I'm... Is this Mulan? And mermaids? I'm struggling here because haven't you given us fictional characters by way of defending honesty? I'm not even sure what to think. If honesty was the best policy, shouldn't you find, we shouldn't worry about mermaids, right? Unless you found some. An entirely different case. Do let us know. So what I want to say is, my esteemed opposition here made an interesting point. They suggested that we're in fact arguing for dishonesty. That's not quite what's happening here. We're arguing against the view that honesty is the best policy, and I'm going to give you an example of why it's important that you get that precise idea in your head. Because what I want to say to you here right now is that in fact honesty is not a policy. So when we make that clear, you will see how we in fact are not arguing for a policy of dishonesty. We're not arguing for a policy of any kind whatsoever. So here's how we get to that. So let's ask yourself this. Who is honest? What entity in the universe has the quality of honesty? Well, as far as we know, people do, right? So people are honest. Fair enough, okay? Well, what entities in the universe have the quality of policies? Well, it's things like banks and governments and universities, right? So honesty goes with people, and policies go with social institutions. So in other words, honesty cannot be a policy because it takes intention to be honest. You have to be a person to have this intention. You can have the quality of being accurate. You can even have the quality of being, say, efficient or effective. You can even have the quality of being transparent. These are qualities that policies can have. But honesty is something that is unique to people. And ladies and gentlemen, we have traits or dispositions or at best qualities. You might even argue that honesty is a virtue. I wouldn't agree with you, but you might actually argue that if you felt so inclined. But I am damn sure it ain't a policy, and that's a political scientist.
Yes, I'd like to pick up on that particular point. About policy and about whether honesty even is a virtue. A policy is mindless. It's something you blankly follow without really having any say. A policy says do X, you do X. There's something disturbing. It takes away agency from the person. Now you might say you are being an agent because you actually are submitting yourself to the policy. But that's like saying that a slave is an agent by choosing to be a slave, to embracing their lifestyle. Yes, they can do that, but is that commendable? Is that something we would actually cherish or hold as an example? I don't think that it is. So I would have this issue with this idea of building on Dr. Frost's particular claim that holding that honesty as a policy actually is an advantageous thing. A little bit of a weaker claim, perhaps in not saying that policies cannot be applied to honesty, but I'm fully in agreement that holding that a policy of honesty is the best one to adopt is really suspicious. And that really we need to decide on a case-by-case basis whether you should be telling the truth in a particular situation or not.
All right, you have another 5 minutes.
So Dr. Frost seems to keep coming to this point of how we keep telling stories and that fiction, she seems to think that fiction can't be honest. But I think she's, I don't think that this is true. I think that you can have honest fiction. As Alan Moore, so he's the author of The Watchmen and V for Vendetta, he writes that artists use lies to tell the truth. What we're getting at is that truth bit. It's both the intention and the outcome of your action can be honest. So, for example, on books that are honest, things that come to mind are things like The Old Man and the Sea, 1984. Sure, they're works of fiction. Maybe those people didn't actually exist, but they try and get across honest messages. Things that aren't honest also come to mind, like maybe Twilight. So, yeah, I think that you can have honest fiction. Also, Dr. Rada, also something that was a little bit concerning was you thought that policies had to be blindly followed. And I think that may be a little bit because you've already shown your penchant for hating democracy. So I think that, no, you don't have to blindly follow policy. You can be an agent in the policies that you yourself adopt and that other people adopt as well by voting in democracies and trying to convince others, like in this debate. So I don't think that you need to blindly follow policy.
And I would add that, yeah, if I'm creating a policy myself and imposing it on myself, I'm not a slave to my policy. I'm creating this. I'm voyaging forward. And to address your point to say that as a human being, I don't have to have a policy. I must be a bank or some other large corporate boxy thing just trundling around. I would say that I myself, as a person, which I believe you both are, on the outside. As a person, I have several policies myself. For example, if I am getting on an airplane and I notice it has no wings, I get back off. If this one might be more relatable to you, because this is I guess your interest. But if I'm walking down a road by a lake and I see a child, I go and help that child, unless that child is a mermaid. This is a policy I have designed for myself, and I don't know about you or about the audience, but I'm quite confident in the belief that I'm not a bank. If I were, I would have probably been able to afford nicer clothes. And I would add, because you always seemed skeptical about what honesty can do. And you said, who uses honesty? It's people. Well, there's one person in particular that we noticed has used honesty. As they said, honesty has always worked for me. And they're a person of great success. They're a great American artist by the name of Katy Perry. And I don't know about you, but Katy Perry seems to be an all-right role model in creating policies. So I believe that, and she is a person and not a bank. Unless you have evidence to the contrary.
I mean, she just doesn't strike me as the type that would have policies. I don't know about you, but she seems much more likely to be disposed of than to have formal policies on it. So again, I'm struck by this idea of honest fiction. I mean, come on. If anyone tried to, they've told you a fib, and they come up to you afterwards and say, no, it was an honest fiction. I mean, are you feeling better about that? I mean, I'm sorry, but I'm pretty sure that the debate was conceded right there. Because the second you say that there is such a thing as honest fiction, then you are telling us that honesty is not always the best policy. You have to get a little fiction in your honesty for it to actually be powerful, which is why we keep hearing stories from you about mermaids. That's the only plausible explanation. But in all seriousness, let me make this point. You know, I do admit that, as I said, an adorable resolution, argued in very charming ways. And I do want to say that it's not that honesty doesn't appeal to me occasionally, and it's not that it doesn't sort of warm my heart, and it's not that there aren't occasions when it would be appropriate. I'm not sure that actually not having a terrific time up and down water slides doesn't sound wonderful and all that. Why shouldn't I do it? But let's just say that I honestly decide to line up occasionally. Here's my point, ladies and gentlemen, that you mentioned democracy, and it puts me in mind of one of the great theorists of politics, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Jean-Jacques Rousseau has a wonderful line about democracy, where he basically says, he tells us how to have realistic expectations of it, because you said yourself, look, the odds on democracy being 100% are very slim in the world, and the idea, I don't know that a lot of people would say that honesty is a necessary requirement for democracy, because if so, it wouldn't have lasted as long as it has. But here's Rousseau's point about democracy. He said that if, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, he said that if men were angels, if they were angels, democracy would be the perfect system of government for them. But they're not. They're not. So he says we have to take men as they are, and, as he puts it, laws as they may be. So policy, if you wish to maintain this wrong-headed term, they may be a certain way. But in other words, so when you design something, you have to design for the real people you have. And who's the real people we have? Are they always going to line up neatly at the bottom of water slides? I don't think so. Occasionally, there's going to be a few people who butt in line. There's going to be a few people who tell fibs. So I want to point out to you guys, how many people, well, I can't ask you this. It's a lecture stop. Think about your email, ladies and gentlemen. Think about your email. I am willing to bet that in the last 24 to 48 hours, you have gotten an email asking you for your bank account number. Did you send it? No, you didn't. Because guess what? The world isn't made of angels, and they probably didn't inherit that money in a small African country. So you are not responding, which means that honesty is not the best policy because we don't live in a world of angels, and only a chump would try and pursue a policy of complete honesty in a world where men are not angels. So every now and then, it doesn't mean we're calling on you all to be dishonest, but every now and then you have to use a little wisdom about when you use your honesty.
You've got 45 seconds.
Oh,
So in my 45 seconds, brief point, I was a little bit surprised by the aesthetic argument that was offered by Mr. Farrell in favor of honesty, because from an aesthetic point of view, it really seems like dishonesty is more interesting, isn't it? I mean, truth is boring. It happens, you report it, that's it. A lie. Life with each retelling, there's a creativity here. There is something really, dare I say, magical. And this ties into some of the things we said earlier on about whether honesty truly is the best policy. What about creativity? What about innovation? I wouldn't go so far as to say that they're exactly lies or falsehoods, but they are akin to lies and falsehoods, and that counts for something. Thank you.
Oh yeah. Okay, so with now this imagery of the mermaids and Matt Blackshaw as a walking bank, we now have 15 minutes of anarchy, so to speak, where you can just fire away at each other, and I will moderate, since I'm the moderator. So, go right ahead.
If I may open, Dr. Frost, you offered the point that we do not live in a world of angels. I may say we do live in a world of spam filters, and perhaps you should consider getting them. Your seemingly endless problems with Nigerian princes.
And may I suggest that you remove yours, because you will be answering a lot of email.
But I think we're arguing that all men should be angels. That's sort of the crux of our argument. That
It's a policy.
That honesty is the best policy. Yes, at the moment, this policy is not being adopted. But in this perfect world where honesty should be adopted, we wouldn't be getting emails from Nigerian princes. We would all be lining up at the bottom of the slides.
Or rather,
wouldn't that be, can we all concede that that would be a nice world to live in?
or if the Nigerian princes were real. I would accept that as well.
Adorable! But I am fascinated by the fact that it's that side of the debate that live in worlds with angels and mermaids and Nigerian princes.
You have a secret speaking of the magic of things. I don't know why you're getting so upset about these speeches.
Well, that's not my fault. You're the ones who aren't supposed to be talking about magic.
But just as you should not be criticized for your partner's arguments, we don't throw people in jail for the crimes of their kin. So just as storytelling and creativity is the kin to lies, they are not the same thing. So we shouldn't be throwing out the creativity with the lies. We should just be throwing out the lies.
Do not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Again! Got it up.
You ran with it.
How I to perhaps approach on a different tack. You are both respected professors at an excellent institution like McMaster. What are your own personal beliefs on plagiarism?
Well, there's questions in this debate.
Because
That pause tells us everything.
to me, I mean, if honesty were not the best policy, surely a certain amount of plagiarism would be acceptable, if not encouraged. What say you?
I see this as when Stefan's going.
So your basic argument is a kind of ad hominem that do not itself endorse plagiarism, that we somehow are defending a bad argument or a bad position. What we're saying is that not that dishonesty is the best policy for everyone and every occasion. We're simply saying that honesty is not the best policy, and that on some occasions dishonesty could be the best policy. But we reject the claim that plagiarism is one of those cases.
Wait, so could honesty ever be the best policy?
As a policy?
As a
Well, but you just said that dishonesty could be sometimes the best policy. So you concede that sometimes...
Honesty might be an appropriate policy at times. It could be a good policy.
appropriate,
at
not
times.
excellent?
It
What
is
would be the best policy
certainly-
for a 1B06 paper?
Saving children from later. Nothing to say. Let's go with that one.
I will accept that.
Oh, good. The children are safe.
So I'd like to just kind of build on a particular point.
Of course.
So if enough people believe an untruth, it seems to become indistinguishable from the truth. If enough people believe, let's assume falsely, that a particular leader is a god, will they act any differently than they would if the leader really was a god? Their beliefs make something false indistinguishable from something that is true. If what passes for truth is just the point of view of those who have the power to enforce their point of view, then a policy of honesty starts to look really stupid. This person propagates falsehoods of those in power. And why would anyone do that? Why would someone choose to do that over developing their own truths?
In the interest of honesty, I was going to say that was a bit quick for me. Also, is untruth just a pretentious way of saying lie?
I'm willing to go with that.
I'm sure I am, just in case we gave anything away there. You can have untruths that are not lies.
An example.
Some of the best stories we tell are untruths, which are not
Are they
lies.
untruths or are they honest fiction?
I rest my case, but that seems to me to have conceded the point.
No, I think we're arguing over what category does that fit in. Does this fit in the truth? Or you're arguing it's an untruth, where I believe we would say an honest fiction belongs firmly in the truth container, or mason jar of honesty. Put change and stuff in when you're buying eggplants. Or categories of ideas. Seeming as we have reached a bit of an impasse here, I might mention that in Dr. Frost, in your own emails that you send to students and presumably other members of the university, you include a line from a play which is entitled "The Importance of Being Earnest," which alone, I would say, illustrates the importance of being earnest.
You know it's a personal name, right?
Yes, but the title is spelled as a concept rather than personally because there's an E in it.
The largest story.
But it's a fiction. I have to keep going back. It's a story. There is no real Ernest. He's imaginary.
No, but there's an Ernest at the end because his father was named Ernest the whole time.
You do know that it's imaginary. This might be the root of the problem. All imagination counts as honesty for you. Then it's a very broad policy that you're endorsing, and pretty much anything seems to be able to fall under it.
Oh, not absolutely anything. For example, not saving children.
The Frost rod eclipse.
The Frost rod eclipse would be a clear exemption.
That's why we get rid of the angels. That's how we did in the angels.
So when we were talking about the Matthew Jordan shoulder angel and devils, you just offed us.
Well, I mean, you know, we don't live in a world of angels. That's what I can tell you.
Have
Well,
you?
but so going back to the world of angels comes from Rousseau, right? We sort of like to subscribe to a different philosopher. We like Hobbes and the social contract, which says that sort of everyone has to buy into this general policy in order for things to move forward. And so we believe that one of these general policies that everyone should accept is honesty.
Exactly. I believe that the state of nature is not desirable. I mean, as Hobbes said, it's nasty, brutish, and short, like an ill-tempered gnome.
Unfortunately, under Hobbes, you put the ill-tempered gnome in charge. I mean, isn't this exactly the point that we've been making? That if you allow the guy with the biggest sword to be in charge,
And gnomes can't carry that.
then he's not going to be the sovereign. The sovereign is going to be the most powerful force, and they will create whatever the hell they want as their account, and you're going to have to deal with it.
But it's still their presumably false opinion is still false, right? We're
Right,
for the
but you
for the
just told us
essence,
that
which
was
is-
the better world we should look forward to.
if their core principle is honesty.
No, it's not. I'm sorry, it's not. Our principle is security and avoiding the sword.
Do you not like security?
No, I'm all for security. Security is a great policy. Let's go with that one.
Policy, or is it just for banks and large?
Yeah, all countries have it too, so
Okay.
they're sorted.
Okay. I guess something else we could bring up is I like you brought up Rousseau, and I might ask, how many Nobel Prizes did Rousseau win? The answer is 0. To quote a Nobel Prize winner, Russell, I believe in honesty. He also says, I believe in a good time, I believe in good food, I believe in sex. So clearly this is a man with excellent taste. And so are you saying, I mean, he's clearly an expert in such things. You can see his medal down in Mills if you don't believe me. I don't believe it was for good food or sex, but for writing on things such as honesty.
Well, it's interesting you say Bertrand Russell, since he was well known for being unfaithful to his many wives.
That's the sex part. That's how he enjoyed it.
I see your point as reinforcing one of the latter beliefs of Russell. Who's to say that he wasn't upfront with his previous wives about this? Were you in? Yeah. Were you there to observe and comment, or? I just wrote down no.
Does either team have anything else to? Because can we take a question if we wanted to open up a question that we can discuss from the audience? Is that something I'm allowed to do? Yes, yes.
I have a question for you. Wouldn't the best policy be the policy that people will follow? So if people don't follow the policy of honesty, then it's not really the best policy.
Well, I mean, if people really enjoyed drowning children, and everyone would follow it, I don't think that's the best policy.
If you needed a consensus for every policy, then you couldn't have any policy. You would have to live in anarchy, because not every single person is going to agree on everything. We're not contending that policies need to be universally followed by everyone. It's just that the general rule of society one of the best rules of society is honesty. So no, you don't need everyone to follow the policy. I mean, we can have a policy of no murder, and that's a great policy. I like it. I really like it. But like, there are still murderers out there. Doesn't mean we have to throw, oh darn, there's murderers. Let's like strike that one off the list. Like, that's not how lawmaking works.
Let me know that no murder is different from no murder. No murder being the previous topic of discussion. Do you have a response to that? No?
The notes are on their own.
Should we take another question?
I just wanted to throw it out there that corporations are people too.
Oh, they are? Yes, absolutely. But I would have thought that the art side community could have seen past that one. Yes.
You're insulting us as a people now? Not even addressing your opponents, but the loving spectators who became a part of
as long as you are individually, with your disposition towards being insulted by these kinds of comments, then I'm fine with it.
Victor.
I have a question for Dr. Vada relating to the story you told about the God King and how when everyone believes in the God King, they make it true. So, first of all, I can see just off the bat, I can see some disadvantages to this system because the God King is naturally incentivized to maintain the system where he is considered to be a god, and therefore would not want to change anything. So, and this has been shown in the history books as well, that when you have a God King set up, countries stop progressing. And on top of that, you're also vulnerable to having outsiders come in and challenge your perceptions of what is true and what is not true. So maybe one day, an outsider comes in, maybe a Spaniard, and all of a sudden you realize that, wait a second, our God King is not all-powerful, and he can't protect us from gunfire or disease. And that doesn't sound like a good policy to base your society off of.
I think you just made my point for me. I'm not looking at this from the standpoint of the God King. I'm looking from the standpoint of the subjects of the God King. What I'm saying is that if they're adopting a policy of honesty, they're taking this falsehood as being truth and propagating it. I'm saying that if you are the subject, you're better off not adopting a policy of honesty in the situation. So I'm not making a case that the God King, it's in the God King's best interest to be dishonest, although it could be. I'm looking at it from the standpoint of the subjects of the God King.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're saying that that if the subjects were taking honesty as the best policy, they would see that the falsehood as a falsehood, because they're not blindly accepting.
They're not idiots.
Well,
I do believe.
but they're also they're trying to get at the honest bits of the world and accept those. So they would recognize the falsehood for what it is, a falsehood.
They're taking the received truth as truth, just there to be reported. Whereas I want to suggest that truth is something that can be created by living a certain way. So in that case,
Dropping knowledge.
With that mic drop, ends this period of the debate, and we move to 5 minutes of closing statements from each team. So,
Who starts?
Wait.
You start?
You sure go
Okay.
go right ahead.
I will re-elevate the
Please.
turn. So, as you have seen, we're likely correct. But before we go, let's play out another scenario for you to. We're sticking to our stories, so I'll just illustrate perhaps a more relevant real-world scenario. You, Dr. Frost, are driving. Dr. Roddick, you're sitting in the passenger seat. You're off to a meeting of highly excellent profs, or Zumba, or whatever it is. And you pull up at a stop sign, and it's a busy street. So you're patiently looking for an opening in the traffic. And you ask Dr. Roddick if he sees anything coming from his direction. Dr. Roddick, you reply, "Why, yes, Frosty." You're called Frosty. "Why, yes, Frosty. There's a bus coming. You better wait." And of course, you wait patiently, and you leave when it is safe. Now, if he lies, heaven forbid, you get smushed by a northbound 51, and that's obviously not good for you, and you traumatize many pedestrians and children in lakes nearby. There's many onlookers, and it's just a mess. If, on the other hand, you turn to him and say, Arshwab, you call him Arshwab, which is an acronym for Rada Sohada with a Bada.